Welcome back to the boring sleep library. Tonight, we're going to let our minds drift, not to battles, not to kings, not to loud or restless stories, but to something softer, gentler, and endlessly repeating. Imagine the Nile River, wide, steady, and slow. Its waters have been flowing for thousands of years, the same rhythm of rise and fall. Season after season, along its banks, reeds bend in the breeze, papyrus grows in quiet clusters, and if you listen closely, you might hear birds calling across the still morning air. And floating on that water, there is a flower, not loud, not grand, but patient, calm, and constant. A flower that closes each night and opens each morning in a rhythm so steady it became a symbol of life itself. The Egyptians called it the lotus. Tonight, we'll let this flower guide us into rest. We'll follow its slow opening with the sunrise and its gentle closing with the evening. We'll move at its pace, quiet and unhurried. So, wherever you are, find that comfortable position. Let your body sink a little deeper. Take a slow breath in and a soft breath out. You don't have to hold on to the day anymore. Just let it go. As the river flows, as the lotus blooms, as the night carries you, there is nothing you need to do. Only listen, only drift, only rest. And so, let us begin with the story of the Egyptian Blue Lotus, the flower of the Nile. Imagine the Nile River, quiet, steady, unchanging in its long rhythm of rise and fall. Its waters were the heartbeat of ancient Egypt, flowing from far to the south and emptying into the wide Mediterranean. Along its banks, reeds bent in the soft breeze, papyrus grew in thick green clusters, and the air carried the faint sound of birds calling across the still morning. On that river, and in the pools connected to it, another plant opened its petals to the sun. It was the blue lotus known in modern botany as Nymphea caerulea. Though often called a lotus, it was, in fact, a water lily. But for the Egyptians, it mattered little what name later scholars gave it. What mattered was how it looked, how it behaved, and what it seemed to symbolize. The blue lotus had delicate petals, a star-like arrangement radiating outward from a yellow-golden center. In the coolness of the night, its flowers stayed closed, almost invisible against the water's surface. But when the sun rose, the petals opened wide, spreading toward the light, as though greeting the dawn itself. As the day passed, and as evening returned, the petals closed again, retreating back into stillness. This daily cycle, this gentle rhythm of opening and closing, was not just a botanical fact. To the Egyptians, it was a cosmic truth made visible. The ancient Egyptians were people who observed patterns, cycles, and repetitions. They saw how the Nile rose and fell each year, bringing floods that nourished the land. They saw how the sun rose and set with precision. They saw how the moon waxed and waned. And in the blue lotus, they saw another cycle, life opening in the light, closing in the darkness, and returning again the next day. For them, the flower became a symbol of rebirth, creation, and eternal life. In some myths, it was said that before there was land, before the gods themselves had taken form, there was only water. Out of that water, a single lotus flower rose. From the center of this flower, the creator god Ra emerged, shining his light into the darkness. In this way, The lotus was not only a flower, but also the cradle of creation itself. Imagine the slow unfolding of petals on the calm waters of the Nile. To the Egyptian mind, that unfolding mirrored the universe itself unfolding from nothingness. Each morning when the lotus opened, it was as if creation was happening all over again. Each evening, when it closed, it was as if the world returned to its quiet sleep. But the lotus was not only a mythic flower, it was part of daily Egyptian life. Farmers along the Nile would have seen it blooming in the pools left behind after the floods receded. Children might have played near its blossoms, while women gathered them for decoration or for use in perfumes and oils. Its fragrance was said to be sweet, gentle, and calming, a scent associated with pleasure and relaxation. In banquet scenes painted on tomb walls, the lotus appears frequently. Guests at feasts are shown holding the flowers in their hands, smelling them as musicians play harps and flutes. In these depictions, the lotus is not simply decoration, it is a sign of joy, of sensual delight, of life lived fully. To hold a lotus at a banquet was to say, I am alive. I am enjoying the sweetness of this world. The flower's presence in art was nearly universal. On temple columns, the carved capitals often took the shape of lotus blossoms, along with papyrus and palm designs. These three plants, lotus, papyrus, palm, were the symbolic flora of Egypt, representing the fertile Nile, the union of Upper and Lower Egypt, and the gift of creation. To walk into a temple and see stone pillars carved in the shape of lotus buds was to be reminded of the flower's divine significance. The daily opening and closing of the lotus was so closely tied to the sun's journey that the two became inseparable in Egyptian thought. The lotus was the flower of the sun, and Ra himself was sometimes depicted emerging from it. The golden center of the flower even resembled the shining disk of the sun. Some texts describe the lotus as the sacred seat of the gods. In images of the young sun god or of child gods, such as Harpocrates, they are often shown seated within a lotus blossom, fingers raised to their lips in the gesture of infancy. This imagery linked the flower not only to rebirth in a cosmic sense, but also to youth, innocence, and the potential of new life. One of the most striking moments in modern archaeology came with the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. Among the treasures, his body itself was adorned with garlands of flowers, and woven into those garlands were blue lotus blossoms, now dried and withered by time, but still recognizable. The presence of these flowers around the young king's body was more than symbolic decoration. It was a statement of belief. Just as the lotus opened each morning, so too would the king rise again in the afterlife. For Egyptians, the boundary between life and death was porous, and the lotus was a bridge across it. To place the flower with the dead was to affirm the hope of resurrection. It is easy to imagine how calming, how reassuring this symbolism must have been. Each day, the flower opened again, no matter what troubles or uncertainties the people faced. Each evening, it closed, a reminder that rest comes to all things. Each morning, it opened again, promising renewal. The Egyptians, living in a land of cycles, the cycle of the Nile floods, the cycle of seasons, the cycle of birth and death, saw in the lotus a faithful partner to the rhythms of existence. It was not a flower that bloomed only once. It was a flower that bloomed again and again, endlessly repeating its gesture of life. And so, when one walked along the Nile in ancient times, perhaps hearing the sound of water lapping against the banks, one would see the blue blossoms floating serenely on the surface, their golden centers mirroring the rising sun, their petals like rays of light spreading outward. Let us pause there, by that ancient river, and imagine ourselves watching as the first light of dawn touches the horizon. The water reflects a faint pink glow. The lotus buds begin to stir. Slowly, gently, they open, one by one, a soft ripple of color across the pools. This is how the Egyptians began their day, not only with the rising of the sun, but with the rising of the lotus. Both were signs that life continues, that creation is renewed, that beauty returns after darkness. And in that rhythm, they found comfort, meaning, and a reflection of the eternal. To the Egyptians, creation was not a single event long ago. It was a mystery that repeated itself, echoing every day. One of the most ancient and powerful myths tells of the time before all things, when the universe was only the waters of none, dark, endless, and without form. Out of that infinite sea, a mound of earth rose, the first land, and upon this mound bloomed a single lotus flower. From within that lotus came the first god, Ra, the shining sun. Some stories say that Ra appeared as a child, glowing with light, seated within the petals. As the flower opened, light spread across the darkness, and creation began. Other versions say that it was the lotus itself that gave birth to the sun's fiery orb, raising it into the heavens. In either telling, the lotus was not just a flower, it was the vessel of light, the cradle of life, the doorway between nothingness and being. Each time an Egyptian saw the lotus open at sunrise, they remembered this myth. The dawn was not ordinary. It was a reenactment of the very birth of the universe. The Egyptians recorded this reverence in their art, which covered temples, tombs, and monuments. On walls and columns, lotus motifs appeared again and again. A visitor entering Karnak or Luxor would see columns topped with capitals carved to resemble lotus buds, sometimes closed, sometimes open, reminding worshippers of the cycle of day and night, of birth and death. Painted papyri often show gods seated upon a lotus blossom, or entire bouquets of lotus flowers being presented to divine figures. The gods themselves were sometimes described as the lotus-born. In funerary art, a deceased person might be shown smelling a lotus blossom, symbolizing their rebirth into the next life. The repetition of the lotus in Egyptian art is calming, almost meditative. Petal after petal, column after column, painting after painting, the flower seems to bloom endlessly across Egypt's monuments. This repetition was intentional. It was a visual reminder that life renews itself, that death is not the end, that creation is continuous. But beyond the temple walls and tombs, the lotus also played a part in more earthly scenes. In richly decorated tombs from the New Kingdom, we find scenes of banquets and feasts. Nobles and their guests recline on couches, musicians pluck harps and strum lutes, dancers move gracefully, and wine flows freely. And always, the lotus is present. Guests are shown holding the flowers to their noses, inhaling their fragrance. Some wear lotus blossoms tucked into their wigs or crowns. Servants carried trays of food and drink, and among the offerings are garlands woven with lotus petals. For the Egyptians, enjoying the scent of the lotus at a banquet was more than a gesture of luxury. It was an affirmation of life, of joy, of being present in the moment. The flower's sweet fragrance and gentle beauty embodied the fleeting but precious pleasures of earthly existence. One inscription from a tomb painting reads, "Put lotus to your nose and drink and make merry, for tomorrow is uncertain." The flower was a reminder both of joy and of the passage of time, urging people to savor the present while trusting in renewal. The blue lotus was also used in the making of perfumes, oils, and ointments. Ancient Egyptians were skilled perfumers, blending oils and resins into scents that were worn for beauty. Used in temples and applied in burial rituals, the fragrance of the lotus was associated with love, pleasure, and the goddess Hathor, who presided over music, dance, and intoxication. Perfume jars found in tombs sometimes contained residues of oils infused with lotus. In one case, traces of a perfume linked to the flower were discovered in a container sealed for over 3,000 years, a faint echo of its ancient aroma still detectable. The goddess Hathor, with her links to joy, love, and fertility, was closely tied to the lotus. During the festival of drunkenness, a yearly celebration held in her honor, people would gather in large numbers, drink heavily, and dance through the night. Scholars believe that lotus-infused wine may have been part of these festivities, enhancing the sense of ecstasy and communion with the divine. Imagine a festival crowd, music rising in the air, laughter echoing. Wine cups passed from hand to hand. In such a setting, the lotus was not only a flower, but a companion of joy, a symbol of love, a bridge between human pleasure and divine blessing. Yet, the lotus was never far from the thought of death and what lay beyond. In Egyptian belief, death was not an end, but a transition, a passage into another realm, where life continued in a new form. The lotus, with its daily rebirth, was the perfect emblem of this hope. In the famous Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and prayers placed in tombs to guide the deceased through the afterlife, one spell reads, "I am this pure lotus, which went forth from the sunshine, which is at the nose of Ra. I have descended that I may seek it for Horus." To identify with the lotus was to claim rebirth, to be united with the eternal cycles of the gods. It was a declaration of faith that, like the flower, one would rise again. Let us return again to the Nile, in our imagination. The river glides smoothly, its surface catching the first rays of morning. In the still waters of a side pool, lotus flowers begin to open. Their petals, blue with a hint of violet, spread outward from a golden heart. A fisherman paddles past in a small boat, glancing at the blossoms as he casts his net. Children run along the bank, pointing at the flowers, laughing as they play. A woman stoops to gather a handful, lifting them gently, their stems dripping water. She will carry them home to place in a jar, where their fragrance will fill her house. This was not a rare sight, not an unusual event. It was part of daily life, and yet, in its simplicity, it carried deep meaning for the Egyptians. To see the lotus was to see the sun reborn, to see life renewed, to see beauty offered freely by the world. When Egyptians thought of their land, they thought of three plants together: papyrus, palm, and lotus. Papyrus grew tall in the marshes of the delta, representing Lower Egypt. The lotus, more common in the south, came to symbolize Upper Egypt. And when papyrus and lotus were shown together, intertwined or knotted in the hands of a god, they symbolized the union of the two lands, the harmony of the kingdom as a whole. On temple walls, gods are sometimes carved holding bundles of lotus and papyrus, binding them as if to declare, Egypt is one, Egypt is united, Egypt is whole. The palm, with its tall trunk and many fronds, represented longevity, victory, and eternal life. Together, palm, papyrus, and lotus created a triad of fertility, endurance, and creation, the very essence of the Nile's gift to its people. For Egyptians walking into a temple, seeing these carvings would have been like reading their nation's identity written in stone. Every pillar, every decoration carried meaning, connecting the people to their land and their gods. The lotus did not remain only as a motif in art or decoration. It was worn as a crown, as a garland, as an amulet. Archaeological discoveries show necklaces made with lotus pendants, carved from faience, stone, or precious metals. The flower was also woven into real garlands, worn by the living at festivals and by the dead in burials. Some depictions of pharaohs show them wearing crowns adorned with lotus blossoms, signaling rebirth and divine favor. Gods, too, could be shown with the lotus sprouting from their heads, a symbol of their power to renew and sustain. Even children were sometimes adorned with lotus amulets, believed to protect them and align them with the eternal cycle of life. In this way, the flower was not only seen but carried, worn, and lived with woven into the fabric of Egyptian existence. Rituals in Egypt were not performed quickly. They were long, deliberate, filled with repetition. A priest might stand before an altar, offering lotus flowers one after another, reciting hymns with a rhythm that echoed the cycles of nature. The act of giving a lotus was not just symbolic, it was participatory. To offer a flower was to take part in the daily rebirth of the world. Each morning, as the temple doors opened to greet the sun, the priests reenacted creation itself. Lotus blossoms, fresh and fragrant, would be presented to the statue of the god, reminding both priest and worshipper that the cosmos was being renewed. The repetition of such acts, day after day, century after century, created a rhythm as steady as the river itself. The Egyptians lived with one eye on the present world and one eye on the world beyond. The lotus connected these two realms. It was the flower of feasts and perfume, but it was also the flower of tombs and eternity. It delighted the living with its beauty, but it also comforted the dead with its promise of rebirth. This duality present joy, future hope made the lotus a uniquely powerful symbol. Few other plants carried so many layers of meaning at once. Let us, once more, return in imagination to the quiet banks of the Nile. The air is warm, but not yet hot. The day still young. Birds skim across the water. Reeds whisper softly in a shallow pool. Dozens of lotus blossoms spread their petals toward the light. Their golden centers glimmer, faintly as if each held a tiny sun. A fisherman stops to watch. He has seen this sight 1,000 times, But still he pauses. A priest walking to the temple glances at the flowers, recognizing in them the echo of creation. A mother lifts her child to point at the blossoms, teaching the little one the meaning of what blooms before their eyes. The flowers open slowly, steadily, without hurry. Their cycle is eternal, their rhythm unbroken. In them, the Egyptians saw life itself fragile, beautiful, yet endlessly renewed. So the blue lotus became more than a plant. It became a mirror of the universe, a companion in daily life, a sign of joy at banquets, a crown for kings, an offering in temples, and a promise of resurrection in tombs. Day after day, night after night, age after age, it bloomed and closed, bloomed and closed. And in its repetition, the Egyptians found meaning, comfort, and the quiet assurance that life continues, always.
Thank you.